NeuroSemantics Wisdoms meeting, where we will be sharing wise ideas regarding neurosemantics. Now, welcome. I wish you good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to each and every one of you. Welcome to this gathering of the neurosemantics community from all over the world. So let's give ourselves a big hand for that. I am Mazuki. I'm a neurosemantics trainer and meta coach, and I represent Malaysia in the ISNS leadership team. This is the ISNS Neurosemantics Wisdoms meeting. The purpose of this Neurosemantics Wisdoms meeting is to have a stronger connection between our international society and the Neuro-Semantics Institute and the members from each institute. It is a platform for us to refresh our knowledge of neurosemantics, to recharge and be inspired with renewed meanings, and to increase our collaboration and to have fun. And as those of you who came in earlier, yes, we do have considerable fun, considering that we have upstanding members of the community in our midst. I wish to honor your presence today by greeting each and every one of you through the National Institute. So unmute your mics so that we can honor everyone by loudly greeting in your national language as I introduce the institutes. So are you ready? Let's begin with the Institute of Neurosemantics Africa. Let's give them a big hand. Africa, welcome. Next, the Institute of Neurosemantics Australia. Let's give
G'day,
them
mate. G'day, mate. Yay.
Hey.
Next is the Institute of Neurosemantics Brazil. Let's give them a big hand.
Hey.
Olá.
Hello,
Good to
bom
see you.
dia, bom
Bom
dia.
dia.
Welcome. Next is the Institute of Neurosemantics Egypt, Middle East, and North Africa. Let's give them a big hand. Woo! Welcome. Next is the Institute of Neurosemantics Europe and Scandinavia.
Yay.
Hello.
Let me hear your
Hi,
voice,
hi.
Niels.
Hey, hello.
Next is the Institute of Neurosemantics Hong Kong and China. Let's give them a big hand. And the majority of the people from China is in another room. So welcome to this meeting. Next is the Institute of Neurosemantics Indonesia. Selamat datang Indonesia. Next is the Institute of Neuro-Semantics for Latin America and Mexico. Let's give them a big hand.
Hola.
Bravo, bravo.
Buenos días.
And next is the Institute of Neurosemantics Malaysia, Philippines, and Singapore. Yeah, and we are
Yay.
here. Not to mention, of course, Thailand and also India under this institute. And next is the Institute of Neurosemantics USA. Let's give them a big hand.
Hey.
Yay. So it is such a pleasure and honor for me to be hosting this meeting for this evening. This meeting is scheduled for about 90 minutes. Michael will be making the presentation on what you don't know about the genius state. That presentation will be for 45 minutes. And then we'll have discussions, two discussions, about 12 minutes each, where you'll go to the rooms and you'll be discussing in the breakout rooms. So before I continue on, I'd just like to remind you that please be here for the presentation and also the discussions, because when you do that, you'll be able to get the maximum value from the meeting. So without further ado, let me just, before I call on Michael to present, I need to find uh, I I can't find Michael's screen. Oh, there. Right. So we've got that screen on, and so let's get started. I would like to invite Dr. Michael Hall to present on what you don't know about the genius state. So over to you, Michael.
All right. And you've got the slides ready to go?
Yes.
All right. Not too long ago, a lot of us were in Malaysia for the trainers training, and we did the 3 days of accessing personal genius. And then all the new trainers spent the next 2 weeks, each of them presenting one of the patterns. Of course, the key pattern is the unleashing personal genius state. And hearing that, and especially when we came to the finals and people were presenting whatever their pattern was, one of the things I started paying attention to was, are they in the state? Are they in their genius state? And my guess is that they were more in their being tested state or a learning state or a feedback state, but not the genius state. So they all knew the genius state. They had all been through APG, as all of you have. And yet, the strange thing about it is that they weren't using it. So I thought I would present this about what you don't know about the genius state. Now, the genius state, if you know it and you use it, it will change your life. It changed my life. Before I learned it in 1994, I would write, not a lot, not very fluently. It was a lot of work. It was struggle. I would fight against writer's block. I would struggle with an idea and trying to get it translated down on paper. And then once I learned the genius state, stepped into it, and started writing from that state, all of a sudden, no more writer's block, no more struggle. In fact, it became easy. Writing started to flow. And that was 1994. And I can say, honestly, I have not had writer's block since 1994. That's 30 years ago. So it's pretty powerful. It'll change your life if you know it and use it. So let's look at what this is. We call it the genius state, the first slide. And this is what it is. Other definitions for it. It's optimal state. It's you at your best. That's because all of your resources are now available to you when you're in that state. When you're in that state, we call it a state of flow. Csikszentmihalyi, that was the name, he named it, flow. That's because your activities, your mind, your emotions, your speech, your behavior flow from a sense of competence and ease. Athletes call it being in the zone. Abraham Maslow called it a peak experience. One of those experiences that you have that is the best of life when everything is just clicking and it's a peak experience. It's quite memorable. William Glasser called it a positive addiction, speaking about running and meditating and writing and other things. He called it a positive addiction, wrote a book by that title. So that's what we're talking about. It's a very special state. So our next slide identifies how we use this very special state in neurosemantics. We call it our flagship. So the 14 patterns in APG all lead up to and access and create this state that we call the genius state. And as you notice on this slide, this is really a differentiating factor between what we call neurosemantics and NLP. So I went to Geneva years and years ago and presented APG, ended on the third day with the genius pattern. Everybody accessed some pattern. 5 years later, I returned to Geneva, and a whole lot of the people who had been there originally had returned. They wanted to have it, they wanted more of neurosemantics. And I asked them, how many of you have created 2 genius states? And there was 3 or 4 hands. 3 genius states, there was only 2 hands. 4 genius states, there was just 1. 5, there was none. 6, none. 7, none. 8, none. And it made me realize that people were using this as if it was just single state for one thing, and they weren't using it in their everyday life. I've got about 12 genius states. I've got a genius state for reading. I've got a genius state for writing, for hiking, for running, for going to the gym, for coaching, for training. So the genius state, it's such a special state because it's an optimal state and you at your best. What genius states do you have? How many do you have? So our next slide gives you lots of choices. Lots of choices. And pick out 2 or 3. Pick out a state that is a state that you need to be successful in your life. And then the challenge is to develop your genius painting state, your genius singing state, selling state, negotiating state, delegating state, persuasion state, confronting state, receiving feedback state, whatever it is that you would like to have as a optimal state, a peak experience of you being in the flow. When we first presented the genius state, there were several original distinctions that John Grinder, Judith DeLozier had made from their studies of Gregory Bateson. And so our next slide identifies these original distinctions of the state. It's a state of intense focus. So where in life do you not have the focus, the concentration that you really want? Is it in reading? That was my first choice. I would find myself reading, and then my mind would float away, think about other things. My eyes were still watching and looking at the words, but nothing was going in. So I decided I want a genius reading state. So when I'm reading, that's what I'm doing. Single tracking, that is first level attention focus, so that I'm completely there. And when I accessed and developed that genius reading state, comprehension went up, it doubled, it tripled, so that I very, very seldom ever have to reread a passage because I'm there. One of the other distinctions was multiple perspectives that gives wisdom to the whole. That was from Gregory Bateson. It's a commitment state. So a genius state is a state where you're really committed to achieving whatever you want to achieve. And it could be simple as communicating effectively, being compassionate with somebody, parenting a child from the state of love, a commitment state. And the other distinction that they picked up from Gregory Bateson was you create this state by a clean state shifting in and out of the commitment state until your neurology knows the difference when you're in it, when you're out of it. So to those original distinctions, I added the following. This is the next slide. And so the first one is crystal clarity of purpose and direction. That's why we do the intentionality pattern just before the genius state. So we become intentional, on purpose, and we're operating from our highest intentions. And of course, then the other patterns we have in APG are about congruency and personal alignment to your values and vision. So if it's a sports state, playing tennis, running, hiking, walking, doing Pilates, connect it to your values and beliefs. Why are you doing it? Why is it important? What do you believe about physical well-being and health? And so once you connect it, it becomes more and more important that will help to create that intentionality and that single-minded focus. An empowering decision is another piece that we do, making a committed decision with your executive mind that this is what I'm going to do. A lot of people don't have the genius state of single-minded attention because they have never made that executive decision. This is what I'm going to do for this period of time and nothing else. They have not really undone the multi-tracking that they've learned, that we all learn from the way we are experience our culture these days. There's emotional intelligence mastery, and that's why in APG we do 2 or 3 patterns dealing with emotions so that we know emotions are our constructs and they come from our thinking. And so what is the emotional state you need to be in when you're doing any of the genius states? And of course, we're going to synergize meaning and performance. We'll get to that a little bit later as we talk about some of the things you may not know about the genius state. But first, let me identify what you do know, and that's our next slide. What you do know is that this is a highest intention state that generates a laser beam focus for an exclusive concentration. Now imagine having that state when you go to the gym, a laser beam focus for exclusive concentration. I read the biography of Arnold Schwarzenegger, and he said that 1 curl with intention is worth 10 without. That's the mind to muscle principle. 1 curl or 1 lift of a weight with intention. Now, when I go to the gym, I see so many people on their phones and talking and doing other things other than working out. And so they're not going to get the benefit. It gives you a single-minded focus, and then realities vanish. Because when you're there, what's going to happen is you're going to be so focused that your attention to other things like time, environment, other people, even yourself will disappear. And it's one of the signs that you're in that state. You're in that state of flow, you're in the zone, because these other things disappear from your attention. You're lost in that activity. And at the same time, you're fully alive to it. You're fully alive to it. You're completely engaged in it. This concentration is a concentration without interruption. You become uninterruptible. When you're really there, someone may have to wave their hand in front of you, knock on your forehead to get you out of the state because you're so fully there. You're without interruption. If you're easily interrupted when you're reading, if you're easily interrupted when you're coaching, if you're easily interrupted when you're training, you're not in the state. So this is an uninterruptible state. And because you set the frames for when to be interrupted, then it's under your control rather than the things that happen around in the environment. And the last line we have on this thing is most people have too many things on their mind and are easily distracted. So that's what you know about the genius state. The next slide, here are some things you may guess about the genius state. Number one, it's an optimal state. It's not about your IQ. It's not about your intelligence. It's about your being at your personal best for doing and engaging in whatever you're doing. You at your personal best. All your resources are available. So I knew a lot about writing, and yet I would have writer's block. I knew a lot about writing because I would read about writing. I had many books on writing. I knew the strategies for writing. I had all those resources, but I didn't have the state. Because I didn't have the state, the resources weren't available. Once I accessed my personal reading, writing genius state, suddenly, just like driving a car, you don't have to think about it anymore. I didn't have to think about writing. What I knew about writing was now at an unconscious level and available. So you may have also guessed that unlike multi-tracking, double tracking, the genius state is the opposite of that. It's single tracking and fully in the here and the now, and therefore highly productive. You want to be more productive? Want to get more out of the gym? Want to get more out of persuading and selling or influencing people? Parenting, coaching. So it's highly productive because you're combining meaning and performance. And the great thing about this is this state is for everybody. Anybody can learn it. Most everybody has experienced it at some point in time in their life. So this is what you may guess about the genius state. Now, let me mention some things that you may not know about the genius state. First of all, you may not know that this genius state, when you set the frames, and this is the next slide, when you set the frames are your protection. So we ask people to go into the state and then to start setting some frames, when to do it, where to do it, with whom to do it, how to do it. And each one of those frames sets up a boundary for that activity. Each one, as you answer that question, you're saying, here's what's inside of it, here's what's outside of it. And once you set that, and once you commission the unconscious part of your mind to take control of it and to run it, then it'll run unconsciously. You don't need to think about it. It frees you for that single-minded engagement. It empowers you to get lost in there. So momentarily, you lose the ability to go meta. Now, isn't that amazing? We go meta to set the frames, and once the frames are set, we're so caught up in the immediate activity and moment that we lose the ability to go meta. If you are going meta while you're doing that, then you're not in the genius state. You're not in that singleness of consciousness and purpose. You're multi-tracking. Greg Robateson says you have a curious inability to achieve meta statements because you're so completely focused on that. And that's your protection. The frames that you set now protect you from getting out of the state. Another thing you may not know, and this is our next one, is that the physiology of the genius state is your anchor. You don't need to set an anchor with a touch or with a gesture or with a word or a visualization. The physiology of the state is the anchor. That's why you do that impeccable state shifting. The impeccable state shifting, in, out, in, out, in, out, trains your body to feel the state. Now, oftentimes when I see trainers lead and set up the genius state, they accept way too quickly that someone only has to do it 2 or 3 times. I always recommend 12 times, at least. Get your body, train your body to know the state when you're reading, know the state when you're writing, when you're coaching, when you're training, when you're negotiating with someone, whatever the state is, get your body to know that. So there's no need for a kinesthetic anchor. It's anchored redundantly in all the systems. And now the event, writing, speaking, coaching, the event will trigger the body's knowing and the body's program. Just like you put your hands on a keyboard and suddenly your body knows how to type. Or you get on a tennis court, and if you've been trained for tennis, your body just knows how to do it. And so the physiology of the genius state is the anchor for the state. And so if you haven't done that impeccable state shifting with whatever, then continue to do it. Here's another thing you may not know about the genius state. It's a hypnotic trance. Actually, the whole pattern is you setting up for you a hypnotic trance, a trance-like state, an altered state, an internally focused state, so that whatever it is that you're doing, you're completely there. Think about a rock climber climbing hundreds, 300, 1,000 feet up on a vertical rock wall. He needs or she needs to be in a genius state and be completely there and not multi-tracking and not thinking about anything else except being one with that wall. It's a hypnotic trance. And you've set the frames for that trance. That's why we go through the second step of the genius pattern. When do you want this? When do you not want it? Where do you want it? With whom do you want it? How? So as you identify this world, this universe of meaning, whether it's reading or writing or coaching, in that engagement, then you've got a trance-like induction into that state. And when you're there, here's another sign that you're there. You're not conscious of yourself. You're self-conscious. You're self-forgetful. You can forget yourself because the concept of self has vanished away, and you're engaged in that one particular action. So the next slide, another thing you may not know, and this is one of the misunderstandings about the genius state. The genius state will not teach you strategy. That is, you have to learn the strategy of the activity before you set it up. So if you don't know how to write, you don't know anything about free writing or structuring an article, and you just start writing, you're not going to write very well because you don't know the strategy. Same thing about coaching. First, you need to know the strategy for how to do coaching or training or whatever it is that you're doing. So the mistake is to assume that you don't need to learn the strategy. Once you learn a strategy, like I had the strategy for writing, I just didn't have the state. Once I have the state, I can access the strategy. And that's the power of the genius state. The genius state allows you to access what you have learned and make that available to you as resources that are now fully available to you. So the genius state provides the context and the environment for expressing what you've learned and your strategy for that. So if you want a genius training state, first learn the skills of training, know them well enough so that you know what to do, how to do engagement or group rapport or framing or using your voice or whatever it is, and then get into the right state so that what you have trained and studied will be available to you. Our next one is, you may not know that the genius state is a peak experience. Now, Csikszentmihalyi renamed it. He was reading Maslow. He liked what he was reading in terms of Maslow's descriptions of peak experience, people being at their best, and those best moments, opening them up to their own development and growth. And he renamed it and called it flow, because your behaviors just flow out of that authentic self. And so what you may not know is that when you get into a genius state, you can have some of those peak experiences of life. This is a synergy of meaning and performance. And because you're bringing meaning and performance together, it borders on peak performance. So the difference here is peak experience and peak performance. The genius state that you're in may not be a peak performance because you may not be at that level of competence with the skills yet, but it can be a peak experience every single time. That is one of those moments that makes life precious. really wonderful. A quotation from John Hagel's research on flow is that executives in flow are 5 times more productive than when they're not. So that's the power of it. It's truly a peak experience because your mental clarity is now at a height, and you're so less distracted by things. The next slide is our meaning performance slide. And this is something we present in Neuro-Semantics and just about every training we do. The meaning axis, the vertical one, going up more and more meaningfulness, and the horizontal axis at the very bottom on performance. And so the next slide takes this basic structure. The next slide. It takes this basic structure to show that there's this zone, and this zone moves from quadrant number 1 into quadrant 4, moving from undeveloped to more and more developed as we pull together meanings and performance. And Csikszentmihalyi called this flow. We call it self-actualization, the synergy of meaning and performance. The next slide, one more thing you may not know about the genius state is that risk is required. How about that? Risk is required. That's because as you're moving up through that flow zone, more meaning, more challenge, more performance. And so you got to take a risk. And so set your risk at doing something 3%, 4%, 5% greater than you are now. Set a goal. If you don't set a goal to stretch, because that's what this is going to do, it's going to stretch you out of your comfort zone. And this means that this is how you create it so that it's exciting and challenging. And risk by its very nature means you don't know what's going to happen. And because you don't, you pay more attention. You zoom in on what's really critical. And so risk is involved as you push your skills of writing, your skills of coaching, your skills of parenting, whatever the genius state is, you push it a little bit further. For years, I set a goal to be 3% better in training every single year. And then I had to find behaviors. What am I going to do with my voice or my stage presence or the use of space that will be a little bit more challenging this year than it was last year? Finally, we got one more. You may not know that the genius state enables high caliber thinking. So the quality of thinking, as you grasp the essence of something, the heart of an issue, is what occurs in the genius state. This is why we really urge people in coaching, get into your genius state, because if you want to find the real issue, the heart of the issue, as quickly and as effectively and elegantly as you can, then you need to be in that right state, because then you'll do some real high caliber thinking and you'll be able to grasp it. Your critical thinking will unpack an experience and recombine it for new creativity, for new innovations. And that kind of high caliber thinking will lead you to question experiences, to ask about what's not being asked. It will increase the quality of your thinking when you're in that genius state. As a writer, oftentimes when I'm writing, I will the writing will flow, and I will have ideas that I've never had before, and oftentimes I want to grab those and catch those because it's high caliber thinking that occurs there. So the bottom line, our next slide, the bottom line, the genius state, it's genius. It gives you a competitive advantage in whatever you're doing. because you're at your best. Your single-minded focus means you're undistracted and raises the quality of your thinking. It's a peak experience. That means there's a sense of just pure joy, the joy of living when you're in that state. And it'll enable you to set up to become some of the best coaches, trainers, consultants, parents, managers, leaders in the world. And so the only thing left to say is go for it, because it's yours, it's available. If you will use that pattern, step into that pattern, have someone run that pattern with you again and again and again, so that instead of just having 1 or 2 genius states, I hope each of you will have a dozen, 2 dozen genius states, states where you're at your best, you're in the zone, and you're now experiencing truly being fully alive, fully human. And with that, we got time for questions. Our next slide. I can't hear you, Marzuki. You're
Sorry. So again, thank you, Michael, for that presentation. Blew my mind about having a dozen, a dozen genius states. So let's open up for questions for the next 10 minutes. If you have any questions, just raise your hand and ask away before we go to our breakout room. So anyone has any question? The first one.
Michael, I have a question regarding the emotional state. You mentioned that we need to go into some emotional state before the genius state. Do you mean that we have to go into our desired emotional state before we go into this genius state? Like, for example, we need to go into calm state before we go to genius state. Is that what my understanding correct?
well, every genius state will have an emotional state. So when I'm running, the emotional state will be nervousness and excitement. When I'm writing, it'll be calmness and curiosity. When I'm coaching, it'll be compassion and love, maybe confrontation. There will be an emotion
It comes
with every
with it.
Yeah, that's why you need to have emotional intelligence, emotional mastery to choose the right state. If you're in the wrong state, the genius state won't work.
And then my understanding that before we go into a genius state, we need to know the specific strategy, the intentionality, and we go into the right state. So these are the 3 things we have to be kind of like prerequisite before we go into the genius state.
Yeah, that's why we call it the prerequisites of genius.
Okay,
in
thank
APG.
you.
Sir, I have a question. I mean, I have read your meta-state work. So let's say if we get a command on meta-state, so will it help us to achieve genius state?
The genius state is not in the meta-states book. It's in Secrets of Personal Mastery. It's in the APG training manual, and it's in many, many of the manuals, but it's not in the meta-states book. So you need to have the pattern. I think it's on the website.
Okay, sir.
I'm sure somewhere on the website there's the genius pattern, because we've written about it so many times. But you need to follow that pattern.
Okay. Sir, I have another question. As you have clarified it, thank you for that. What I was trying to say is that that in meta state, let's say you talk about how state formation happens. So for example, like you said, the genius state is all about that state wherein we achieve peak performance. So let's say if we work on our states, let's say if I do not allow myself to go in a bad state, then eventually it will help me to go in a genius state. So in that relation, I was asking you that if meta state, if knowledge of meta state helps me or anyone to go in a genius state.
No, for the most part, no. And that's because what we know in neurosemantics, knowledge is not doing. This is the big mistake, the big myth in human cultures everywhere. People think that because they know, they can do. Knowing is not doing. That's why in neurosemantics, we run this pattern, mind to muscle. You've got to get it into neurology, and that's action, and that's behavior, and that's interaction with another person. And so knowing will not lead you there. Knowing will deceive you into thinking that you have it when you don't.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. A question from Bill. Go ahead, Bill.
Hi, Michael. Bill from Vietnam. So you were mentioning that when you are in genius state, you cannot go meta, meaning that you are in there, you are very focusing. So can I from my understanding, does it mean that you are not really aware of you are in the genius state? You can only know your genius state when you are out of it and you do reflection on it, or self-reflexivity. So you know that, oh, I was in my genius state for the last 30 minutes. So am I right to say that?
Right. This is what Csikszentmihalyi discovered when he was studying happiness. He was studying happiness, and he found out people are most happy they are performing something that's really meaningful to them, that's challenging to them. So he created the challenge, we call it meaning, competence or performance scale. And he noticed that people are not happy when they're doing it. My father used to say to me, he wasn't interested in running because he never saw a runner smiling. Well, not when you're running, not when you're lifting weights, not when you're climbing a mountain, not when you're doing some peak performance or experience. But afterwards, it's the afterglow. As you think about it, that was one of the best moments of my life. So afterwards, you're happy. Happy or joy comes afterwards. Now, neurologically, going meta means using your prefrontal cortex of your brain. And in the prefrontal cortex of your brain, you're setting intentions, you're planning, you're deciding, you're reflecting upon yourself. That's the prefrontal cortex. And it's fully activated when you're going meta. When you're in the genius state, another function occurs. It's called hypofrontal. Hypofrontal. And that's the sense that the prefrontal cortex is disconnected. And at that moment, you have a sense of being one with everything. Whatever you're doing, you're one with that thing. And the prefrontal cortex is deactivated in those moments. It's operating, but not consciously. And consciously, now you don't have the ability to access that. So we know from the neurosciences that these neural functions are occurring in those two ways. The prefrontal cortex is activated, and then under hypofrontal activity, it's disconnected.
Thank you, Michael. Rodrigo has a question. Go ahead, Rodrigo.
Yes, from Brazil. Hi, Michael. There is this course that I understand is right after APG. So can you tell us a little bit about this course? I think it's a 2-3 days course as well, right?
You're talking about LPG?
Yes, living with AG. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, Living Personal Genius is a 4-day training.
Pessoal. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, Living Personal Genius. It's 4 days, and each day has a theme. The first day has the theme of resilience and 4 or 5 different patterns that build up resilience as a meta state, genius state. The next day, I think, is business, and we got 4 or 5 patterns for your business state, business genius. And the next day is relationship. So your relational genius state, and the last day is on attitude and all the attitudes that you would want to install. And so having a genius attitude state. So that's the 4 days of LPG.
So thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Michael. So I think we are about ready to go to the breakout rooms. So before
Marzuki, there are also questions on the chat group.
Yeah, the question from Xiu Hong has been posed. So, there's a question from Eileen. How did you measure your 3% improvement every year?
Well, so to do any kind of measurement, you've got to get a base of behavior. So let's say that as a trainer, at the end of a training, I could go through the videotape and see that I did 5 framing or reframing while I was doing that 30-minute training, and I want to improve it 3%. Well, I'm going to aim for doing 6 frames or 6 framing for the next one. So you get your base of behavior. If I'm doing 10 reps with a certain weight and pushing, bench pressing it, then I want to do 11. So it's not a big jump. It's just a small jump in some way that you can measure it. So you need a base from which you can operate.
So I'll put in one more question from Ronald. If the prefrontal cortex is deactivated in the genius state, which other system is activated?
Well, now you're actually the lower part of the brain, the motor cortex and the associative cortex and all the cortexes that involve you doing something, writing, reading, coaching, you're completely engaged in a single focus on doing whatever you're doing. I notice that when I go to the gym and if I'm going to curl, and if I get myself into that state, I'm not thinking about anybody around me, any of the machines, the time of day, what I'm going to do after the gym. I'm thinking about making that one motion. And so the prefrontal cortex just doesn't need to be a part of that.
Marzuki, there's another one. I'll just read it out. Michael, it's from Jokni. Does the genius state always have a positive correlation with meta pleasure? Jokni, if you want to expound on that, feel free to unmute yourself.
Well, the short answer is no. And that goes back to in the genius state, you're pushing yourself to do something. You're pushing yourself to do something, whether you're speaking or negotiating or relating to someone or doing some activity, climbing a rock wall, for instance. You're doing something. And at that moment, it may not be pleasurable. It's afterwards that the pleasure comes. So the pleasure pattern is a different pattern, and it's for enjoyment of your values rather than pushing you to achieve something and take on a challenge.
Another question from Rodrigo. Go ahead, Rodrigo.
It's actually a question from the Brazilian chat. So we have noticed that the burnout is raising. What would you recommend? What kind of alert so we have a flow state that contributes to avoid the burnout?
Yeah. Burnout involves 2 things that I'll mention. One is we're trying to do too many things. Too many things are on the plate. So, and so reducing the load then becomes the way to handle the burnout. Because I'm taking on too much. And people need, this is where making good executive decisions about their life, and ecological decisions, do I have the time, the energy, the personnel, is this the time of my life to add this other thing onto the plate? And oftentimes it's just not. And we are seduced by our societies into thinking we can have it all. We cannot have it all. We have to make some good choices and to say, in this stage of my life, I'm going to be focusing on this and maybe a few other things, so that we do all of them with some quality and goodness. The other thing about burnout is making sure we have constant rejuvenation, and that's where the pleasure pattern may come in, and some other patterns come in, to where we're rejuvenating our sense of delight and pleasure, so that we're having fun in the quality of our lives. And people who don't have time for themselves, don't have time to reflect, don't have time to spend quality time with their loved ones, they're pushing themselves way too hard. They need to cut it out and do one thing well and make sure they have some rejuvenation going on.
Sir, I have a question. Sir, I mean, in genius state, as we are talking about, so it is said that amygdala in brain is responsible for emotional things. Basically, whenever we feel emotional, it impacts our amygdala. So let's say if we attach some emotional meaning to what we are trying to achieve, so will it put us in genius state?
I'd have to have more specifics, because I don't know what you're asking.
Okay, sir, what I was saying is that it is said that, as in, let's say we are emotional beings. So let's say what I was trying to ask is, if we attach some emotional intensity to what we are trying to do, will it put us in a genius state?
No, not necessarily, no.
Okay.
See, this is the mistake of Tony Robbins. Getting people all riled up and beating their chests and saying, I can do it. And just emotional intensity is not the genius state. The genius state, most of the time, is very calm, very deliberate, very mindful. It's not beating your chest and intensity of emotion. Even if you're running a race, you need some nervousness, but you don't need to be over nervous. If you're a boxer and you're in the ring, you need to control that emotion to handle it well, so you can think while you're doing. So it's not about emotional intensity. In fact, in the APG, we do metastating troubling emotions to reduce that. We do dancing with dragons to reduce emotional disturbance, so that we have emotional mastery over it. The emotions come from the thinking, and getting into a good thinking state so the emotions are appropriate is what we need to do for that.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. So let's move on to the breakout room. So I've just put into the box the question. So the first breakout room, you'll be discussing on the question. I'll just put this question on the screen, and while you are downloading the file, first breakout room, what genius state or states have you accessed? The second question is, consider the genius state in terms of the following. How much does it give you from 0 to 10? Focus and concentration, protection from distractions, optimal state for performance, trance of full attention to the activity, strategy for productivity, peak performance, high caliber thinking, ability to take smart risks. So I'm going to create the breakout rooms, and how I can create them is by automatically So Zoom will create that. So if you are in a room, because I have a request from Victor that you would like to be in the Spanish group workroom. I have no control over that. If you do not find anybody who's speaking Spanish in that room, Victor, just come out again and I'll do my best to put you into another room. So we'll have about 5 or 6 people per room. So enjoy yourself. I'll see you back here in 12 minutes time. Welcome back.
Thank you. There we are.
Oh, now you are on
Let's see.
solid ground, not driving anymore.
Yeah, I'm fresh ground now. My home. Let's see. Now I have a background. Okay.
Great to see you, boy. Hi, Bill.
Hello.
Wah, Ari.
Hi, Pak Marzuki.
Ari's here.
Hi, Ines.
Hey.
So welcome back, everyone, and
Yeah.
welcome,
Hi, Ari.
Geraldine. So let's have some. Anyone would like to share what you discussed in the team in the breakout room just now? Oh, Jesse keeps popping in and out. Yes, Rodrigo, go ahead.
One of the things that was
Have
interesting
we lost Mizuki?
on our discussion is that multitasking is not all bad if you choose when or where to multitask. So I would like to hear a little bit about your thoughts on this, Michael.
I think Mizuki's not on the call at the moment.
So,
You may
sorry,
have
Sean?
disconnected himself, possibly.
Sean, I'm here. Go ahead, Michael.
It happens when breakout rooms occur, I think. So let's debrief. Let's debrief the first Zoom meeting. Do we want to debrief, Michael, or do we want to go to the second meeting?
Yeah, Rodrigo.
What's the best approach, to debrief the first one or to go to the second Zoom meeting?
So Sean must not be hearing you, Marzuki.
Oh dear.
Or
Anyway,
genius state.
Anyway, the genius state is the opposite to multi-tracking. And obviously, when you're driving a car, when you're washing dishes, when you're watching TV, that's the time to multi-track. Your attention can go to many other things. But when you're in a genius state, when you're reading, we don't need to be multi-tracking then.
Michael, you mentioned that we can't stay in genius states for a long time because it's intense, right? How much time would you recommend that we spend in genius states, like in a day?
Well, we always recommend 30 minutes at a time. The most would be 90 minutes. But 30 minutes is a good, get into the state, do what you're doing, and then step out, take a break, reflect on it, and then if you need to step back in. That's why in trainings, most of the time, every 30 minutes, we take a break of some sort, or we shift gears to doing one thing or another.
In the chat box from Siu Hong, one classmate asked, could you give example of genius state for strategy and productivity and ability to take wisdom risk? Another one is to ask for the example of strategy or high performance. So Siu Hong, I don't get the question. Would you like to elaborate on that?
Well, when we were discussing about giving this rating for all the question 2, so they were asking, what do you mean by genius? They cannot imagine the genius state for strategy, for productivity, and ability to take wisdom risk. They want the specific examples. That's why.
So all of that criteria came from the discussions of all the things you don't know about the genius state. So when we went through all of that, we were going through that criteria that we summarized in that first meeting. So do I have a strategy for writing? Do I have a strategy for writing an article? Strategy for writing a book? So now in my genius state, how accessible is my strategy for doing that and being productive?
Another question here from Leonardo. Michael, what do you think about firewalking or high impact coach certification and training to achieve a state of genius?
Well, the firewalking is obviously a trance state where for a few seconds, and we're talking seconds, we're talking 9 seconds, when you walk across that fire, you're in a very different state. Your body's in a very different state. And Tony Robbins and other people use it as a evidence, as a criteria to convince you that you can do things that you didn't think you could do. Well, I believe I can do all kinds of things without walking on fire. I don't need that to convince me. But if you need to convince you, then so be it. But that's all it does. It convinces you that there's potentials and possibilities within you that you haven't tapped yet.
Another question here from Donald. How to switch quickly from one genius state to another?
So if your body knows the genius state, then that'll be fairly easy. You just let your body lead the way. Watch the Olympic gymnasts. Watch how they stand before they do any of the exercises, the floor exercise or on the bars, and look at their physiology just before they do it. Their physiology knows what to do, and they go into that state. Same thing with a diver, a runner, a sprinter. Their body knows how to do it, and they put their body into that state. So once your body knows that physiology, it's just a matter of repetition. And then as soon as you think of the event that's triggering it, the tennis court that triggers it, the keyboard that triggers it, someone criticizing me that triggers the genius state of being uninsultable. The trigger then sets off the physiology.
Thank you, Michael. And Rodrigo, you have another question?
No, I don't.
Okay, thank you. So that in that case, anyone would like to share what you discussed in your group before we go to the next breakout room?
So in our group, everybody talked about a genius state that they had, and everybody was pretty high scores. Pick out, if you do the same thing with a genius state you want to develop, you'll probably get very different scores, and it'll identify what you need to do to intensify that genius state.
So a question here from Bill. Michael, can you debunk the myth of multitask? Is multitask really exist?
Well, sure. Well, sure. It exists, and it's our problem. We try to do too many things at the same time. People watch TV and try to read. That's a great way to lower your comprehension 30%. That's what all the studies indicate. When you double track, have a conversation, and you're trying to plan your schedule for the next week, it just messes both of them up.
Okay, so let's get on to our next breakout room, and the question that I sent earlier, I'm putting on the screen. Which prerequisite of genius have you thoroughly integrated? Which prerequisite of genius do you still need to fully integrate? And what personal genius will you next access and develop? Is there a strategy that you need to learn so you can live your personal genius? So those are the questions, and I'm going to open up the breakout room again, about 4 to 5 people per room. And I'll see you back here again in 12 minutes time. So, okay, so we are back from the second discussion. So I'd like to invite anyone who would like to share what were the gems that you discussed during your discussion just now. So go ahead.
Well, a question popped up again. It's about multitasking again. So our discussion is like, is there a criteria to what is multitasking? So let me give you examples. You talk about the phenomena about individuality from person to person, 1. 2, what about if I go to the gym and I put a high-tech music so it can pump me up and continue on? Another member of our group said that in order for her to write, she put classical music. So we understand that triggers can be physiological, but also can be sound and or visual cues or whatever. But then she has that, and she continued to listen to classic music while she writes. So is that in a way as a multitasking? Is that so? Let me stop now. I guess you got the drift.
So it could be a strategy. So I like classical music when I'm writing, but I don't hear it. It's in the background. It sets the mood. It's part of the strategy, but I don't hear it. If I heard it, then it'd be distracting me. It'd be interrupting. It'd be interfering. And now it's a distraction and not helpful. So if it's a strategy that helps and doesn't direct your attention to it, then it would be a good, it'd be part of your strategy.
Thank you, Michael. A question here from Sandra. Please summarize the prerequisites for the genius state.
Well, the prerequisites of the genius state are essentially the patterns of APG. So it's going to be intentionality, it's going to be decision, it's going to be emotional mastery, it's going to be your power zone, it's going to be unconditional self-value. These are the conditions, these are the prerequisites for getting into your genius state. It's going to be alignment, congruency, blowing out excuses, because all of those things can take away from the genius state.
Thank you, Michael. And Ariane, do you have a question?
Yes, sir, I want to ask that as you talked about distraction, that let's say if you hear classical music, then you will get distracted. So, sir, in meta program, we have studied screener and non-screener meta program. So does that thing has to do with that meta program, screener and non-screener? Let's say if we work on that meta program. Yeah, please go ahead, sir. Sorry.
Yeah, the genius pattern is setting up so that you can screen out everything but the one thing that you want to focus on.
Okay, sir. Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Consciousness, as William James said, is usually a stream of consciousness, and the stream has many things entering into the stream of consciousness, and that's how we normally experience our mind, our thinking, thoughts and truth. The genius state is when we set all that aside and we have a single focus for a period of time.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, any more questions or something that you would like to share from your discussion just now. Sherry, you have something?
In our group, we have discussed about a parenting genius state, and Michael has great sharing with us, and I would like Michael to continue. Thank you.
So, as with every genius state, you're dealing with activities. So, a parenting genius state, pick out the activities. Maybe that playing with a child, genius state. It may be disciplining a child, genius state, for that period of time. Dealing with a tantrum, genius state. So you pick out the activity, and then what is the state that I need to be in? What is the emotional state? What is the strategy for dealing with whatever that activity is? And then you build that up so that you can be in that state in a moment's notice. And so in parenting genius state, there's going to be many different kinds, depending upon what you're trying to achieve at any given moment. So as a trainer, there's the presentational genius state, how to get group rapport, how to get engagement, how to use your voice, so all of that. But then there's going to be maybe someone criticizes you, maybe someone heckles you in an audience, and you need to shift gear immediately and deal with that activity. It'll be a different state. It'll be a different strategy than presenting, but it'll be part of the training, the trainer's genius state.
Okay, I've got an interesting comment here from Xiu Hong. One team member said that she is in genius state when she meets a foolish person. I asked her how she calls that a genius state. She said that she walked away from that foolish person and felt pleasure doing that. She said that doing that, she felt pleasure, and with that, she said it is what genius state is trying to get. So I would like Michael to see if it is necessary to make that distinction for her.
Well, I would say that walking away from somebody is not a genius state. It's just walking away from somebody.
Okay.
Because you're not trying to achieve something that needs intense focus. And that's the qualification. You need intense focus. That's why sleeping is not a genius state. It's a natural state that naturally occurs. Your body and your mind will naturally do that. And if you're trying to focus when you're trying to sleep, you're going to have insomnia.
Yeah.
So don't do that. But that's just walking away from a foolish person, which is probably a very wise thing to do.
Thank you for that, Michael. Anyone else has got something, a question or comment that you would like to make? Go ahead, or forever hold your peace. No, we're just kidding. Okay, we are coming up almost to 1 hour, 40 minutes already here. I was about to close. So one more thing over here from Daniel Kwang. I would like to hear how Michael sets his genius state for reading.
So there will be different genius states for reading. Depends on what you're reading. If you're reading a novel, that's going to be very different from reading nonfiction, or reading mathematics, or reading geometry, or reading in quantum physics. So the strategy is, what am I reading? What is my intentionality for it? What am I going to achieve in my reading? And then set your frame for how long you're going to read. And then you get into that state to where I'm in the right state to receive this. Generally, it'll be calm, it'll be curious, It could be playful, depending on what you're reading. It could be it could be capturing key thoughts as you're reading. So you have a strategy for the reading, and then you have a period of time. I read 15 minutes at a time. And then I come out of the state, look around, make sure the world is still here, and then I go back in. And I'll do that for maybe 3 hours. When I'm not traveling and we're not training, that tends to be my daily pattern.
Thank you very much, Michael. So before we end, Michael, would you like to summarize or say a few words before we end this session?
Getting into a genius state will change your life. It really will. So choose it well. Have someone run the pattern. Even if you know the pattern really well, have someone run the pattern with you so that you don't have to worry about the steps of the pattern, and get into that state. Step in and out a dozen times, 24 times. Really train your body to know it. Because when you do, then it's going to be a ready access. And then whenever the trigger, whenever the event in everyday life occurs, you're there, you've got it. It's going to make you more productive. It's going to make you more effective. It's going to enable you to enjoy whatever you're doing much, much better. It's going to enable you to have strategies for handling the ups and downs of everyday life. The genius state is a powerful pattern, and it's yours. It's available to you. Every single human being can tap into it if only you will. And my wish for you is that you'll walk away from this and set up for a dozen genius states that'll bring out the best for you. And when you're at your best, you'll be so much better for other people.
Thank you very much for that, Michael. Let's give Michael a really big hand for his generosity of time. We are holding him back from his coffee, so you can go for your coffee. I miss making coffee for you, Michael. And we don't have any announcements for this evening today. However, before we end, just like to share this wonderful picture with you of the NSTT in Putrajaya. So this picture contains the participants for the psychology of APG and also NSTT. So with that, we come to an end of this session for today. I hope that you have learned something that is useful for yourself. And before we end, keep putting all those nice heart-shaped things over there. And let's take some photographs. So are you ready?
Yes.
Oh, Rodrigo, you raise your hand.
No, just a quick question. Do we have a date for the next Michael encounter?
Sorry, date for?
For the next wisdom encounter, like today.
The next wisdom session, thank you for asking, will be on the 13th of July. It will be on the 13th of July. So let's take our photo. So ladies and gentlemen, please put on your makeup. You have only 5 seconds to do that. So ready or not? So 3, 2, 1. Okay, that's the first screen. And for the second screen, ready? 3, 2, 1. Yes, lovely smiles from all of you. So with that, I would like to thank you for your being here. I really appreciate your presence and your participation in this meeting. And I look forward to meeting all of you on the 13th of July. That's the second Saturday in July. And signing off, I'm Mazuki. I'm a neurosemantics trainer and meta coach, and I wish you an exceptional quality of life filled with happiness, creativity, and fulfillment. So thank you very much, everyone. So see you again. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
Bye-bye.
Thank
See
you,
you.
everybody.
Bye-bye. See you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. See you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Marco.
Good to see See
Thank you,
you.
Michael.
Thank you, Michael, sir. Thank you,
Michael.
sir. And thank you, everyone. Thank you so
Michael,
much.
thank you, Geraldine.
Bye
We have
bye.
the little voice. Geraldine, kiss Brazil for you. I love Geraldine.
And from Norway.
From Brazil.
Thank you,
Sure.
everyone.
Brazil, sure.
Brazil love Geraldine. Live applause for Michael.
Sure.
Couple of extra
Sure.
massages from Norway.